Well, there's one story in my career as a journalist that's never left me. I interviewed the parents of a young girl called Brianna de Vries, who was bullied on social media so badly that one day she went upstairs to her bedroom and never came back down. She was just 14 years old and had her whole life ahead of her. Brianna had been bullied at Woolgoolga High near Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. Her parents didn't just change schools to help her, but even moved interstate. Yet through social media, she couldn't escape the brutal bullying, and it was too much for her at such a young age. It's beyond devastating, and I think back to her and her parents often. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare figures show that there's been a 275% increase in the rates of self-harm and hospitalisation of girls just aged 10 to 14 years old from 2008 to 2021. And social media use has been linked to bullying, mental health conditions including anxiety and depression, body image issues, poor physical health, a lack of sleep. And then there are also concerns around predators and pedophiles, not to mention the age-inappropriate content that's easily accessible. Well, this is why Peter Dutton made an important announcement today. He said he'd lift the minimum age of social media access from 13 to 16. Under his proposed laws, there'd be an age verification system and heavy penalties for social media companies that don't comply. Dutton says children are particularly vulnerable and deserve to be protected.
We've seen some tragic consequences as a result of that online environment having a negative impact on the minds of young, impressionable Australians, and it's true around the world as well.
The Shadow Communications Minister, David Coleman, spoke about how social media and all of the problems particularly impacts on young girls.
The data that we're seeing in relation to the mental health of Australian kids is really disturbing, especially relating to girls. If you look at things like the self-harm, rates of self-harm hospitalisations of girls over the last decade, we've seen dramatic increases in that. And there's no question in my mind that social media is playing a significant part in that.
Look, this issue isn't covered broadly enough in mainstream media and on our nighttime talk shows, but it is a big issue. And in the United States, health experts say that social media is the defining public health issue of our time.
Social media is an important driver of that youth mental health crisis. This is the defining public health issue of our time.
The Surgeon General thinks Congress can and should do more to regulate social media companies, the same way safety standards are in place for car seats, for example.
Well, Peter Dutton's push for new laws mirrors what others are doing internationally. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis passed a law just in March banning children under 14 from having social media accounts.
You can have a kid in the house, safe seemingly, and then you have predators that can get right in there into your own home. You could be doing everything right, but they know how to get and manipulate these different platforms.
And other United States are looking at similar laws. So the tech giants will have to develop or introduce reform and the tech urgently. But David Coleman says the tech's already there, yet social media companies aren't enforcing the age limits that they set at the moment.
There is no scenario where the social media companies will do the right thing, and so we're going to force them to. It's the right thing to do, and we hope that the government will get behind this. The companies will be required to comply with the new law, and that will include penalties if they don't.
We're yet to hear exactly what those penalties are, but the coalition says they will be strong and serious. Now, just this week in Australia, Meta has rolled out age verification for those who change their age online from 15 to 18. So there's reason to believe that they aren't the age that they say they are. It's very hard for any individual parent to pull their kids off social media or tell their young teens that they can't sign up to Snapchat or Instagram when all their friends are already on these platforms and others. But if it's the law, it takes the decision out of parents' hands. And it means that at least until they're 16, social media won't be the dominant aspect of their lives. Now, with Dutton surging ahead in the polls and the coalition preparing for a possible early election, they're now starting to release their policies. Now, Dutton pledges he'd introduce the social media ban for under 16s within 100 days if he wins government. Now, this is a positive and family-friendly policy that will appeal to parents who are concerned about how social media will impact or does impact on the life of their children. Well, Peter Dutton today offered to work on this policy in a bipartisan fashion with the Albanese government.
I don't understand what the government's hesitation is at the moment, but this is one of those issues where we can try and help protect kids online, try and help families and parents have the tools that they need to help protect their children. But it's one of those issues that really should be approached on a bipartisan basis, and we'd be really happy to work with the Prime Minister and the government to see the outcome here and send a very clear message that both sides of Parliament stand united against the scourge of social media and its influences on young minds.
Well, the Prime Minister was asked about all of this at a press conference and he couldn't argue with the policy today. He did appear frustrated that Peter Dutton was getting credit for it. Albanese claimed they were already working on a trial. Although Labor did shut down legislation in November, coalition legislation that included minimum age requirements for social media.
I think very clearly, and the reason why we're doing the trial is that social media is having a negative impact on young people. I want people to spend more time on the footy field or the netball court than they're spending on their phones, very clearly. And a ban, if it can be effective, is a good way to go.
Well, let's hope they do progress with this on a bipartisan basis because it is important. It will be impossible to pull teenagers off social media who are already on it. So there's going to have to be a transition period for how these laws are introduced. And it could be starting with all Year 7 or Year 8 students from 2026. Now, critics say this will be difficult to enforce. But concern about compliance is hardly a reason not to take action. And thinking back to Brianna and others like her who are struggling thanks to the pervasive nature of social media in our lives, well, governments can't afford not to take action.